Section 4.2 is working on deciding if triangles are congruent, and we're going to use two postulates or theorems. The first postulate is called side, side, side. And what that said is if I have three sides of one triangle congruent to three sides of another triangle, then those two triangles have to be congruent. So noticing side, side, side indicating all three sides congruent to the other three on the triangle. So let's look at this first proof that we have. It's showing us that we have LM congruent to NP, so they have marked it, and they've also shown us that LP is congruent to NM. So what I would first suggest to you is that we want to decide from our picture what other things do we know. Do we know any other angles are congruent, or do we know if any other sides are congruent? I don't have any information about parallel lines, so I don't have any angles that direction, and I don't see any X's to indicate that I have vertical angles, so I wouldn't know anything about my angles currently. However, I do see that this side that they share would be congruent to itself. So notice that they have line LN congruent to itself, and so therefore I would have my three sides to set up side, side, side. So what I would suggest for you is go ahead and set up your table, and then along the side, since we showed that it's going to be side, 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 we're going to go ahead and put SSS to indicate what things we need to have. So what we're going to do is we're going to pick one of our sides to indicate the side. So I'm going to write that LM is congruent to NP, and the reason I know that is because it was given. They told me that piece. Then I'm going to pick another side that I know is congruent, and that's going to be LP is congruent to NM, and again, that's because it was given. And then I need that third side. Well, they went ahead and told me that LN was congruent to LN because when we were talking through it, it said that I was going to need three sides, and so I can write it down that it's congruent to itself by the reflexive property. Now I've declared all three sides, so I can go ahead and say that my triangles are congruent by the side, side, side postulate. And yes, you may abbreviate by doing SSS, but you do need to put postulate behind there. Okay, the other theorem or postulate we're going to do is side angle side. And what that says is if you have two sides congruent, it says if you have two sides and the included angle of one triangle congruent to two sides and the included angle of another triangle, then these two triangles are congruent. So what that's saying is I have two pairs of sides congruent. The angle has to be in between the two sides that are congruent. So these two sides that are congruent, they have to be the rays of my angle. Okay? So now what I'm going to do is we're going to decide if we can use side angle side for these next questions. So it says, what other information do you need to prove that this triangle is congruent to, triangle DEF is congruent to triangle FGD by side angle side? Well, they tell me that I have EF congruent to DG, and they also tell me that this angle, FDG, is congruent to this angle, which is EFD. Or sorry, is that my marks here? Whoops. I'm working ahead of myself here. Hold on a second. I do know that DF is congruent to itself by the reflexive property, but I would need to know that this angle, EFD, would be congruent to this angle, FDG, because that is the included angle. So recognizing that the rays, this side that's congruent and this side that's congruent, when I highlight those, the angle in between those two has to be my included angle. So that angle is what I would need to be congruent to the other one in order to use side angle side. Okay, I want you to do the got it question. So in the got it question, it says, what other information do we need to prove these triangles are congruent? Again, I know that LB is congruent to itself because of the fact that we have reflexive property. and they tell me again that this angle is congruent to this angle. So if I highlight my rays of the included angle, that means that I would need LE to be congruent to NB in order to use side angle side. So again, if you're having troubles finding those, make sure you highlight those rays of the angle and make sure that we've marked both of those as being congruent. Alright, this last part is where you're just going to decide if we have enough information, if they're congruent or not. So it says, would you use side, 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 or side angle side to prove the triangles are congruent? And if not, write enough information and explain. So here's my first set of triangles. I see I have one pair of sides, two pairs of sides, and then I try and see where my angle is at. If I highlight my two sides that are congruent, the angle that is in between those two rays is the included angle. So I would have side angle side, and then I would explain I have two sides and one angle congruent. And more importantly, I have the included angle congruent. Alright, next one. On the next one, I see that I have one pair of sides congruent and two pairs of sides congruent. Then I highlight where I see my angle. So I have this side and this side. Both of those sides are touching my congruent piece, so that fits. Then I highlight my other angle, which is this side and this side. The problem with this one is I only have one of the sides I highlighted congruent. The other side is not congruent. So that means that this angle is not included. It's not in between the two sides that are congruent. If it's going to be in between, it would have to be this angle right here. So this one would be not enough information because my second triangle doesn't have that included angle where it needs to be. Alright, you're going to pause the video and try the last two. On the last two, you should be recognizing that you have three congruent sides. So right away I would do side, side, side because all three sides are congruent. And then on letter D, I do have three sides again, so I could put side, side, side. But I also have vertical angles right here, so I could also put side angle side because of that vertical angle being in between my two sides. So either one would be a valid answer. Alright, so this section focuses on side, 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 three sides congruent, or using side angle side, and it's very important that you have the angle included in between the two congruent sides.